Once in a while, your conscience gets the better of you, and you decide to divvy up something precious, like chocolate, with someone else. Now, most of us know a tried and true technique for making a fair split. One person divides, and the other gets to choose a piece. This is a classic example of what mathematicians call a problem of fair division. And you'll be glad to know that the common sense way of dividing something into two pieces is also a mathematically fair way. But the real beauty of the fair division approach is that one person doesn't have to rely on the skill or honesty of the other. If you've both agreed in advance that you'll be willing to accept one of the slices, this method guarantees an outcome you'll both consider fair.
If one piece is a fraction of a hair smaller than another one,
then it's not fair. You guys know the only way to do this is by angles or the radius.
That's what I'm trying to say. And then you look at it and you see where you made your little mistakes and you
There'll be
know
all kinds of holes
but
in it.
Susanna, wait. You guys don't go hard. You don't go.
But don't start feeling too smart. What if you have to divide a chocolate cake among 7 people so that everyone feels they're getting a fair share? How would you modify the fair division rule when there are more than 2 chocolate feeds? In exchange for the free materials, these students are going to tackle that problem for us. We'll check in later to see what they've come up with.
okay, here we go.
Meanwhile, let's look at a different kind of fair division problem, one where the stakes are much higher, apportioning seats in the House of Representatives. In a nutshell, the problem is fractions. Every 10 years, the census provides new population figures. In the 1980 census, the national population was about 226 million, while the population of California was 23.5 million. The size of the House is fixed at 435. California's fair share of those 435 seats is therefore 45.583, and that's where the problem lies. We can't split a seat or a member of Congress the way we can a cake. California may deserve 45.58 representatives, but it must in fact get a whole number, in this case presumably 45 or 46. Apportionment fractions have plagued politicians since the very beginning of American history. In 1792, the first census provoked a bitter contest between Thomas Jefferson and Alexander Hamilton over the division of seats in the House. The battle grew so intense that George Washington sent the original apportionment bill back to Congress, exercising the first presidential veto in American history. And this was just the beginning. Every new census rekindled the controversy. In 1901, Congress faced the apportionment dilemma yet again. The House Apportionment Committee backed a plan that would give Maine 3 seats instead of 4. Maine's representative, Charles Littlefield, rose up in righteous anger.
Mathematics and science have combined to make a shuttlecock and battledore of the state of Maine. God help the state of Maine when mathematics reach for her and undertake to strike her down.
The chairman of the committee, Albert Hopkins of Illinois, responded.
It is true that under the bill, Maine is entitled to only 3 representatives. And if Dame Rumor is to be credited, the seat of the gentleman who addressed the House is the one in danger. He takes a modest way to tell the House and the country how dependent the state of Maine is upon him. Maine crippled, that great state crippled by the loss of Littlefield? Why, Mr. Speaker, if Maine is to be crippled by this loss, then I can see much force in the prayer he uttered here when he said, God help the state of Maine.
Mathematicians Michelle Belinsky and Peyton Young have recently discovered an impossibility theorem concerning apportionment. There is no perfect method of apportionment, no technique that has all the properties we would like and always avoids paradoxes.
I can't. No one's listening.
You know what the problem is? Not cutting straight down.
That's what I said.
Well, the first cake our students attacked is now history, but they're still hot on the trail of a fair division method for sharing a cake among 7 people. Their new idea is based on fractions.
I'm gonna do the 28.
Yeah, don't cut it, just mark it.
But we have this problem with the other case.
This is gonna give us 32.
No. 32, 7 goes into 30.
No.
Times 4 is 30.
What they're doing is they're halving every
And that's not
piece.
gonna work.
Then what did you say, Adam? We're doing your idea.
You're not doing my idea the way I said to do my idea.
What's your idea?
My idea is you do this in half, then you have half. You've got 4.
Right.
Now you have to cut one piece into 7.
Of course, dividing a quarter of the cake into sevenths by eyeball isn't really any easier than cutting the whole cake into 7 pieces. In fact, there isn't any simple geometric method for finding 7 parts, and so it's easy for mistakes to happen.
Can I just ask one question? How did we get 8 pieces?
I don't know. I don't.
And look how small that one is.
So fractions won't cut it. And remember, the real goal of fair division isn't mathematical equality. It's coming up with pieces that all 7 people will accept as fair. Will they discover that idea on the next cake? We'll see.
180 Commonwealth Avenue.
180 Commonwealth Avenue.
When we go to the polls, we take for granted the principle of one person, one vote. The ideal in a political democracy is that each person's vote carries equal clout, equal power in determining who will serve as our elected officials.
The total number of shares that the corporation may issue is 525 million.
But there are situations where one person, one vote is not the way to make fair decisions. In a corporation, for example, if you own 20 shares of stock, you get 20 votes. This kind of division of power is called a weighted voting system.
To the ballot that's inside the agenda booklet.
Weighted voting uses unequal numbers of votes in an attempt to make fair decisions. It seems reasonable enough, after all, for a shareholder with more shares or a delegate from a larger town to have more votes. But votes don't necessarily tell the whole story about decision-making. The real issue is power. Power is the ability to influence directly the decisions of a group. And it turns out that in weighted voting systems, an individual's power may not be proportional to the number of votes he or she casts. This can have surprising and unintended consequences.
All right, let's bring this meeting to order. I'd like to bring this county council meeting to order.
The members of this county council are elected from towns of different sizes. The council uses a weighted voting system. Representatives from more populous areas cast more votes than those from smaller communities. Spencer Whitehall, Junction, 9 council votes. Brighton Alston, River Bend, 9 council votes. Florine Beaumont, North Center, 7 council votes. Seamus McCready, South Point, 3 council votes. Hooter Hampton, Smallville, 1 council vote.
That's true. We need a vote on
Betty Jo Boozman, Littleton, 1 council vote.
I move that we vote on the treasurer's report.
The weighted votes are clearly based on hometown populations, and the county appears to have done quite a fair job. Each council vote stands for almost exactly 333 residents of the county. But does that translate into a fair division of power?
Next item on our agenda is use of state highway funds. Last week, this was discussed at our meeting that a highway be built between the towns of Junction and River Bend. So therefore, if there is no more discussion, that motion is carried.
Wait just a second here now. I feel like we should observe some sort of formal tally here.
I agree with Hooter. What he's saying is right
we
there.
Never,
We ain't had no
may have
vote on it.
discussed this, but it could be a problem here, and I want to get the votes on the table, if you ask me.
I think he's right.
The proposal is to build a highway between Junction and River Bend, the largest 2 communities. Only the representatives from these 2 towns support the idea.
All of those people opposed to having the state highway funds used for building a road between Junction and River Bend say so by displaying your votes directly in front of you.
There's my vote.
There's mine. Well, is 7 and 3 from South Point is 10, 1 from Littleton, 1 from Smallville. That makes 12 votes against. Now, all those in favor of approving funds for the use of the road?
For most decisions, the council requires a simple majority of 16 votes, but the representatives from the largest towns have a total of 18 votes. These two members can pass any measure they wish. Anytime they get together, they make up what's called a winning coalition.
A motion, therefore, the motion is approved. Our next item is use of the federal...
With her 7 votes, the North Center member can also form a winning coalition. She can team up with River Bend or with Junction to make a simple majority of 16. Again, these two representatives have enough votes to overwhelm the opposition of all the other towns. So any two of these 3 council members have enough weight to carry a typical motion. They share equal power.
No, I propose that we make use of the community development funds by building a recreational area in River Bend. It would be of a great benefit because we lack the proper recreational facility.
Now, hold on a minute, Brighton. River Bend is up there in the corner of the county, and personally, I feel that there's a much more facilities place that you can put these facilities where people can use and abuse it at their leisure.
Now, Brighton, I agree, and I don't see why...
Wait a minute. Now, wait a minute here.
What's up, Shane?
The South Point member only has 3 votes, but now he sees a chance to do something for his town by forming a coalition with one of the heavyweights.
Oh, yes, it is. Now, listen. Now, our 2 towns are join each other, so if it's in River Bend, it'd be easily accessible by the folks in South Point.
We want it a little closer where we can get to it, too.
Absolutely.
Why, anyone wouldn't want to use the money to install an additional 9 holes at the County Country Club is beyond me.
Country Club. Now, wait a minute. I think we should end this, and I propose a vote.
I would like to second that, if I may.
All those in favor of the motion, show your votes at this time. And all those opposed to using the money toward the recreational facility, please show your votes.
The South Point gambit fizzles. Because he only has 3 votes, Seamus can't make the decisive difference. He isn't able to form a winning coalition.
We now move to the first item of new business. If you all turn to page 5 of your council report, you'll see the governor's request for us to put a toxic waste dump somewhere in our county. And below that, you'll see by the Beaumont Engineering Company a recommendation for the dump to be located in the town of Littleton.
Littleton? Dag nabbit, Spencer, why does it have to be in my little tiny town? And as for you, Florine, how much chicken and dumplings did you have to stuff into Beauregard to get him to write that in his report?
Beg your pardon, Betty Jo, I resent that. Perhaps if you put a little more chicken and dumplings into your Clarence, he'd be alive today.
Oh, you leave my poor dead husband out of this. God rest his soul.
Perhaps you'll leave him out of it if you leave my poor Beauregard out of here, accusing him of writing a false report. How dare you?
You're getting paid off for this.
Now, come on here, Brighton. You got to side with me on this thing. I mean, you see the righteousness of this report, don't you?
Absolutely. I can see that this report has been done fairly and completely, and I see no reason that we have to cast aspirations of favoritism.
Can I rely on you boys to side with me and break the back of this horrible matter?
Well, I owe you one, Betty Jo, after the last vote, so you can count on me.
Glad to hear that, Seamus.
Besides that, if they put this thing in Littleton, everybody's going to be walking around looking like this from the radiation.
You're right, Hooter.
Right, boys. Well, you know what? I think we're going to have to side with one of the big guys over there. And I think it's going to be Spencer. What do you think?
I think it's right. I think we should go right now. Let's stop wasting time.
In fact, the representatives from the 3 small towns have no power at all. Even as a group, they don't have enough votes to form a winning coalition with any other single representative.
Listen, Spencer, could you find it in your heart to join with us against this dump in my town of Littleton?
Well, I'm not sure that's the proper thing to do.
Well, come on, Spencer. Look, we can put them 6 holes in the golf course. Heck, we don't care about the golf course. We care about Littleton.
Darn right we could. We could cut a deal with you.
Well, that does sound like a good idea.
I think so, too.
Yeah.
Spencer, I make a motion that we vote on this proposal as presented.
Second.
Well, let's vote then.
Let's do
All
it.
those against Littleton being the location of the dump, put your votes on the table.
Ha!
And all of those in favor of Littleton as the location?
There.
Oh, no.
If the county wants to dump all its toxic waste in Littleton, South Point, or Smallville, there's nothing the 3 representatives can do about it. In practice, then, the county's weighted voting system effectively disenfranchises these three members and the voters who elected them. When the council constitution was drawn up, the county thought it was setting up an eminently fair way to conduct business. It's only by looking at the way power works that we can spot an inequity in an apparently equitable system. Now, focusing in on power will be easier if we have a shorthand way to describe a weighted voting system. Mathematicians have developed a simple notation that summarizes the important facts. First, we state the quota, or Q, which is the number of votes required to pass a bill. Then we list in descending order the weight for each voter. The quota is most often the smallest integer that's more than half the total number of votes. That's what we mean by a simple majority. In the county council, for example, the number of votes required to pass a bill was 16, and the members' weights would be shown this way. Consider a familiar example of weighted voting: the corporation. Stockholders vote according to how many shares they own. Now, in a small company with just two owners, say one person holds 60% of the stock, the other 40%. If decisions are made by a simple majority, the company's weighted voting system can be summarized this way. 51 is the quota, or the number of votes required to carry a motion. One stockholder has 60 votes, and the other has 40. The first shareholder obviously wields full power. She can make whatever decisions she chooses. For all practical purposes, she's a dictator. In another company, however, 4 stockholders have almost equal holdings. Again, 51 votes are required to carry a motion, but this time, the voters have 26, 26, 26, and 22 votes respectively. Since no one has more than 51 votes, there is no dictator. But again, a nearly equal number of votes does not translate into an equal share of power. Although the 4th stockholder has almost as many shares as the other 3, he exercises no power in corporate decisions. He's what we call a dummy. That doesn't mean he's stupid. On the contrary, any influence he has depends on his ability to make eloquent arguments, work effectively on committees, and lobby more powerful voters. A dummy is a voter who can never turn a losing coalition into a winning one, or cause a winning coalition to lose by defecting from it. In a third company, the weights are distributed this way. With a quota of 51, the first stockholder has 49 votes, the second has 48, and the third has 3. Here, even though the last shareholder has a tiny number of votes compared to the other 2, he's just as powerful. Since any coalition of 2 voters makes up a majority, there are no dummies. The third person has equal influence. These little model companies illustrate that power is not necessarily proportional, even approximately, to 1 share of the vote. If we want to know how much power a voter actually wields, we've got to dig a little deeper. We need to measure the frequency with which a voter is crucial to a decision. Take frequency to mean the number of times one person is in a position to turn defeat into victory. That means the number of different ways a voter can join a losing coalition and thereby turn it into a winning coalition. This definition of voting power is called the Banzhaf Index, after John Banzhaf, a lawyer at Georgetown University. Here's how we work out the Banzhaf Power Index for a small group. Imagine a 3-person committee set up by a college to review its admissions policies. The committee is chaired by the college dean, who has 2 votes. The other 2 members, who represent the faculty and the student body, each have 1 vote. The quota for decision-making is 3 votes. This tells us that the dean is not a dictator and there are no dummies. On the other hand, the dean does have veto power. Her 2 votes are essential for passing any motion, given the quota of 3. The dean clearly has more power than either of the other members. What we now want to determine is how much more power. The winning coalitions on this committee are those with weights that add up to 3 or 4. The other possible coalitions on this committee are losers. The last entry is what's called the empty set, the coalition of no voters. Now we can look directly at the ways each voter can turn a losing coalition into a winning one. The dean is able to do this in 3 ways. Because there are 3 distinct ways that the dean can swing a loss into a win, her Banzhaf power index is 3. The faculty representative, on the other hand, can make this decisive difference in only 1 way, so his power index is 1, and the same is true for the student member. Once again, actual power turns out not to be proportional to the number of votes. The dean has twice as many votes as each of the other members, but 3 times the power. Another way to capture the power relationships is to create a picture. Let's construct a geometric model of the committee's voting power. The 8 coalitions can be represented as the vertices of a cube. Now, we add the quota of 3, the majority decision rule, to our picture. This divides the cube into winning coalitions, which are the larger ones toward the top, and losing coalitions, which appear below. Since the cube includes all the possible coalitions on the committee, we can read the Banzhaf power index from it directly. Every edge of the cube corresponds to a member whose vote is being added to a coalition. This allows us to label each edge. The quota line crosses the edges that are critical, the edges that represent turning a losing coalition into a winning one. Now we just have to count the number of times each voter appears on these crucial edges to determine the power index. The result is the same. The dean has 3 times the power of each of the other members.
I have had 3 pieces of cake already.
Okay, wait a minute. Do I have to know who I want to finish?
Theoretically, we should go by who is
But
most
wait a
in
minute,
need
wait a
of
minute.
those calories.
No, wait a minute.
Jennifer wants
People
a
have
big
different-
piece.
I want a piece that's like 3/4 of that size because I'm half the time on a diet, but I feel
Well,
like
why
eating
don't
right
we
now.
just divide up the...
Divvying up the cake according to people's needs sounds like a fair scheme, but then, of course, you have to figure out what a fair need is.
Come on, figure the whole thing.
Almost every day's newscast describes some battle between the president and members of Congress. Who really holds the power to control legislation at the highest levels of the federal government? Mathematician Lloyd Shapley and economist Martin Shubik, armed with their own version of a power index, took on this question. You know the basic rules. In order to become a law, a bill must be passed by majorities in the House of Representatives and the Senate and signed by the president. The president can veto a bill, but 2/3 majorities in both houses of Congress can override the veto. Shapley and Shubik looked at this legislative process as a weighted voting system made up of 3 voters, the House, the Senate, and the President. Here's the distribution of power they calculated. Expressed as ratios, the power proportions are 2 to 5 to 5. The Senate and House have approximately equal power, and each has about 2.5 times as much power as the President. For individual voters, though, the ratios look very different. In other words, as an individual, the president has almost 40 times the power of a senator and 175 times the power of an individual representative. These measures of power help us see beneath the surface of a weighted voting system. And their impact is not only theoretical, they already play a role in practical politics. The courts in New York State, for example, now require that a weighted voting proposal be accompanied by a power analysis. In fact, the courts have established that a representative's Banzhaf power index shouldn't differ from the proportion of the population that he or she represents by more than a few percent. If you represent 15% of the county, for example, then you shouldn't wield more than, say, 18 or 20% of the power on the county board. And in recent cases, the courts have become even more strict. Weighted voting systems are tricky. So why do we use them? Because weighted voting enables us to elect officials from natural districts, neighborhoods, and ethnic communities, even when those districts are not equal in population. Measuring power allows us to weight the votes fairly. You might say that using the power index
Allows us to have our cake and eat it too. And speaking of cake,
our students are still working on the problem of how to divide a cake fairly among 7 people. You can see that they've been working hard, but without much success.
there is a fair division procedure for dividing something like a cake among more than 2 people. And now that I've tipped them off, these students will demonstrate the method for us. Okay, guys, all yours.
The first person cuts a piece and passes it around the circle. The next person has a choice. Make the piece smaller or let it go by. If he makes it smaller, he's saying that the reduced piece is the share he's willing to take. He puts the trim back on the cake. And he passes the slice on, because everyone down the line has the same choice, independent of who's gone before. Trim the slice or leave it alone.
I don't know. Give me that.
And here's the decision rule. The piece goes to the last person who touches it.
I'm sorry.
The 7th person passes, so Jennifer is it. This piece is hers.
Because you got a choice.
A new slice and the process continues. Each remaining person has another chance. Trim or don't touch.
Okay. Cutting and you get to choose. All right, now wait.
When there are only 2 people left, they play the traditional version of fair division. One slices, the other chooses.
She knows how to
I want the nice piece.
Yeah.
Are you calling me a slob?
This method works because every person ends up with a share of the cake they cut for themselves. But not everything divides as easily as cake.
So perfectly fair apportionment in all cases is impossible. Someday your state may lose a disputed seat in Congress. And since power isn't always proportional to the number of votes, your councilman may actually be a dummy. But now there's no reason why you should ever get shortchanged at a birthday party.